recognizes Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking our witnesses for being here today and obviously recognize the extraordinary service and sacrifices you have all made to our country, and to recognize the Gold Star families and other members of the military who have joined us today for sharing very powerful testimony. I will say at the outset that let me be very clear that there was never going to be a good time to leave Afghanistan, but this forever war needed to come to an end. And amidst the unavoidable turmoil of ending a war that had spanned 2 decades, the Biden administration carried out an unprecedented evacuation, helping more than 120,000 people evacuate. After 2 decades of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, today's hearing should be focused on examining the full scope of this conflict, its failures and its successes, including how U.S. foreign policy and strategy led to this moment, and how we can continue our efforts to assist and relocate vulnerable Afghans. I fear, however, that today's hearing was not convened in that spirit, but rather as an attempt to distract us from the full picture, and even in some cases to try to score political points, which I believe dishonors the lives lost and the bravery of those who sit before this committee. When the Trump administration pressured the Afghan government to free 5,000 Taliban fighters, it affected events on the ground. When the Trump administration negotiated directly with the Taliban, undermining the Afghan government, it affected the events on the ground. And when the Trump administration dismantled our nation's refugee programs, it impacted events on the ground. And so I know a lot of the discussion today is about our obligation to those who assisted us in this war, and I think we all recognize the important responsibilities that we have. But I want to ask very specifically about the conditions that were in place that made that more difficult. And Mr. Lucier and Ms. Meckler, these questions are specifically for you. President Trump instituted a set of immigration policy that really centered on reducing the numbers of non-white refugees and immigrants allowed to come into the United States. He slashed staffing across the interagencies for those dedicated to processing such applications, including the Special Immigrant Visa Program. And he instituted, of course, the infamous Muslim ban. Throughout the administration, the number of Afghan SIVs processed plummeted, while applications continue to rise, causing the wait times for SIV applicants to balloon to more than 2 years by January of 2021. In June of 2021, Secretary Blinken had dedicated an additional 50 personnel to process SIV applications, but by that point, the average wait time was more than 700 days. The backlog at the time the Biden administration took office was more than 17,000 cases. And so my first question is, in your experience, what kind of damage to the immigration system, to the refugee admission process, and to other U.S. institutions was done during this period, and how did it make it more difficult to bring out the very people that we were attempting to bring out? And did you, in light of what existed at the time, did you notice any willingness from members of the Trump administration to streamline the process for SIV applicants, refugees, or humanitarian parolees, particularly in the wake of the Trump administration's negotiated withdrawal agreement with the Taliban?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. I can take the first stab at answering. I've been an immigration attorney for almost 20 years, and I can assure you that the immigration system has been broken for far longer than that, and that it is systemic failures over administration after administration that has led us to where we are today, and we need to start looking at solutions to all of that, not just what one administration did. When the current administration took office, resources had been decimated in many areas, including the refugee resettlement area. The SIV process had ground to a halt. Backlogs are a factor of life in all immigration proceedings. We look at the SIV system because it is a clear way of helping some Afghan allies, but there are many who could potentially help through family visa processing, but that also is just stuck in endless backlogs. The refugee resettlement process, like I said, takes years and had to rebuild to get even back to where it was prior in the early days of this administration. So I think we need to take a much bigger view. The immigration system is not functional. It is not functional. and it has not been functional for decades. And we need to take a look at it, and we need to figure out how we realign it with our values and how we want to be able to show up and help allies like those in Afghanistan who had absolutely and continue to have no pathways. Even those who made it here are stuck in unending asylum backlogs. And so there's been a lot of reports put out there. The International Refugee Assistance Program, IRAP, has really comprehensive reports on how to fix this IV system for sure. But I think overall, we just need to agree that this system does not allow us to bring people to the United States who we want here. And it's a much bigger question, I guess. I don't know if you have anything you wanna-
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes Ms. Wagner.